people being killed on the job, that was just considered part of the cost of doing work. Right? So that you would expect a number of people to be killed, in your construction projects or whatever. There are just so many catastrophes in the world that have some sort of an engineering failure. One that really sticks in my mind is Boeing.
These disasters are almost entirely, if not entirely, preventable.
Absolutely.
Right?
Society depends on us as engineers to ensure that everything we build, all the projects we work on, are safe.
And it's weird to think about because you think about an ROI, you think of an investment, and then you think about the revenue and your margins that you're going to get back from it. But here you don't really see it because it's something that you prevented. That's definitely something that I wish I knew earlier. So for today's podcast, we have our first professional engineer, Professor Lisa White. Thank you so much, Professor, for joining us today.
My pleasure.
So Professor White is a professional engineer, as I said, and professor at the University of Alberta with the School of Engineering, Safety and Risk Management. Now, that's exactly what we're going to be talking about today, safety and risk management. But I first want to acknowledge that, safety itself is seen sometimes as a buzzword, right? It might seem as dull, boring, and this is not to offend you at all.
It doesn't. It's okay.
But I want to acknowledge this first off because we're going to be talking more about experiences instead of like the technical aspect of safety. So our first-hand experiences, maybe case studies, and we'll talk about the business case as well, how implementing these systems can lead to greater growth for a company.
Sure.
And then how listening throughout this entire podcast can basically help you become a better worker, student, or even an engineer.
And perhaps more employable as an engineer as well.
Yeah. And most importantly, help save a life potentially.
Absolutely. Yeah. That is the most important part.
Yeah, for sure. Now, first off, can you quickly explain what even is safety and risk management?
Sure. So the main key point about safety and risk management is that every activity we undertake has some sort of level of risk associated with it. And safety and risk management is just about recognizing that risk, assessing it, and controlling it so that an activity can proceed. And that's, for your personal life as well as work life as well.
Right. Now, why do you think that safety is kind of seen as a buzzword, like in the industry or just in our communities?
Yeah, I don't know that I'd say that it was like a buzzword, but I feel that potentially organizations don't pay enough attention to safety and risk management, and it's not like a hot and sexy topic because it's seen as boring, right? Because I don't think of it as boring. I think of it as being very proactive, but also like detail-oriented, thorough, and making sure that we implement those measures in the control measures in a really robust way. And engineers are really like prime candidates for doing safety and risk management work because we are thorough and we are detail-oriented. And so I find it really interesting. But a lot of organizations look at safety as a cost to doing business instead of an investment in the business. And I know we're probably going to talk a little bit about the business case later on. When you say buzzword, to me, what that means is some organizations will pay lip service to safety. So saying that the organization is very safety conscious and safety focused and they make it a priority. But if safety is not a value in the organization, and that means a value is something that you base all of your decisions on in your life, whether it's your personal life, work life. If safety is a value in the organization, then that means you're not paying it lip service. You're not just saying you're doing it, but it becomes the fabric of the organization's decision making. And that's what we want. That's when it becomes important.
Now, what's interesting is that it's built, these RMS systems, the risk management systems, the safety programs are essentially built into ourselves, like just the human behavior part of it, right? Like we have the gut feeling. We know when there's a danger, we'll get that gut feeling to stay away from it, right?
For sure.
Now, what's interesting is that even though we have this built into us, we still sometimes neglect it So why do you think that's? Do you think it's just we like to go for productivity more than kind of looking out for ourselves, or what do you think?
Yeah, I think
that?
it depends. It depends on the person and it depends on the organization. Like when you say it's built into us, I think of that as being an innate part
Right.
of a person.
Yeah.
But every person is different and they see risk differently. Like they perceive risks differently. They tolerate
Risk
risks
tolerance.
differently, right? Depending on the person. So the idea of having a risk management system is that it standardizes it. Like, so it's great that, you have a bad feeling and you're not going to go into that situation. Absolutely. That's very helpful to you on a personal level and can help you at work as well. But it's the idea of formalizing a system for managing risk so that you're not just relying on someone's ability to like magically get this feeling of, what might go wrong in a work environment.
Okay, cool. Now, I want to look a little bit into the past now. So, I remember seeing that video of those workers. I think it was the Empire State Building that they were working on. It was just them and their tool belts that it seemed like that's all it was. No PPE, no harnesses, no nothing.
Right.
So we see that from, I'm not sure how long ago that was, but we see that and we see how the industry has shifted to now, where these risk management systems, safety programs are so normalized now. So what do you think kind of made this shift in industry? What really made the industry say, okay, we've been putting this on the back burner for too long, we got to change?
Well, so with the Industrial Revolution, and then you were talking about the construction of the Empire State Building. I believe that was a Depression era project, right? It was to get people in the U.S. back to work and out of the Great Depression. So, Industrial Revolution, at the end of the 1800s and then into the 1930s, worker safety wasn't really focused on at all because people being killed on the job, that was just considered part of the cost of doing work. Yeah. Right, so that you would expect a number of people to be killed in your construction projects or whatever. But I think over time, the idea of a worker going to work and running the risk of not coming home at the end of the day became unacceptable to people. Right. And then, there were the unions that got involved, formed and then got involved and started to advocate for workers. Right. So that's an important thing, advocating for people that work in industry, in dangerous jobs for safety to be a focus.
Oh, cool. Yeah, it's nice to see that that advocacy came in to like bring us to now, where it really does help you go to sleep at night when you know that the project's going well and we're trying to make sure that everyone goes home at the end of the day, right?
Yeah, like it's definitely better. We still have a long way to go, and there's still such variation in different organizations, right? Some organizations do very well with risk management, and some not so much, and it varies from organization to organization, and not just even in industry to industry as well. And I think also there became a recognition, like talking about the past and why this has become important, is that some organizations recognized it as an opportunity to help their business do better, right? So, yes, managing risk better prevents people being killed, which is wonderful, but it also has ancillary benefits to helping the organization be sustainable and succeed financially as well.
And we're going to get into the business case later, and that's going to be a really important aspect of our conversation. But I want to get into your background a little bit. What kind of inspired you to take on safety and risk management?
It's really interesting because I didn't start out in safety and risk management. So by trade, I'm an environmental engineer.
Okay.
My master's degree is in the area of contamination potential from point source pollutants, so surface water, groundwater contamination potential. Right. So I did a lot of consulting work in the past in terms of environmental risk assessment. So it really was just focused on, the potential for air, water, and land impacts from proposed development projects.
Okay.
But that also brings with it other aspects of my career that I started to recognize were really important. So like a lot of my past jobs, there were some instances where safety and risk management were not very well done, and so it got me to thinking, how can we do better in the future? So my engineering training, along with my personal experience in my past work history, kind of culminated in me, being able to sit in this position in the School of Engineering, Safety and Risk Management. And it's been almost 8 years now.
8 years?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Very long time. Yeah. I finally feel like I'm getting the hang of it. So it's been really good.
Okay, let's go over those 8 years really quickly. I'm sure that you've reviewed countless amount of case studies throughout them, right?
Yeah.
Now, which one really sticks out to you the most?
Gosh, there are just so many catastrophes in the world that have some sort of an engineering failure associated with them, like the lack of the people involved, the engineers involved to recognize the risks and make sure that they were managed to a reasonable level. There's so many of them. There's thousands that happen every year. One that really sticks in my mind is Boeing. Right. And the Boeing 737 MAX case, where two airlines crashed, the Malaysian Lion Air and Ethiopian Airlines planes crashed. And it was completely preventable, did not need to happen. Not only did the first plane not need to crash, but decidedly the second plane did not need to crash, because after the first one that happened in, I think it was late 2018, Boeing took kind of a cursory look at what they thought happened, and they blamed the pilots. And in fact, it wasn't pilot error in any way, shape, or form. And so then they didn't ground the fleet. So they blamed the pilot. So they blamed human error, and they let the planes keep flying. And so it allowed for the second plane. And so now we have over 300 people that were killed in those two crashes. And Boeing is and I use the word good really loosely, in terms of a case that can provide lessons learned to us as engineers. It's a good case that way.
Yeah.
And not just for the two planes that crashed, they're still having issues. Right? Today, we hear about the Alaska Airlines plane that the door blew off on takeoff or landing, one of the two, and luckily no one was killed. We have other inspections of the planes where they found loose bolts in the doors, and these things are entirely unacceptable. And not only is it their airline manufacturing, also in terms of some of the spacecraft that they've manufactured. I think there are currently 2 astronauts stranded at the International Space Station because the spacecraft that they were on didn't have the structural integrity to take them back down to Earth in a safe way. So Boeing is just a really egregious case of how they didn't manage risk well, and how they are still not managing risk well. Right? Their recent CEO has stepped down. Another gentleman has stepped up as of August of this year, and we'll see. Right? And there's a lot to be said for leadership. Right? Leadership and culture are ground zero for managing risk well. You can have the best risk management system going, but if you don't have the commitment of the lead people in the organization to set that tone for everyone working within the organization, it's just a matter of time before something ends up going wrong. And so There was one CEO when the Boeing 737 MAX experienced the MCAS issues and the crashes. And then another CEO came in, and that CEO has recently stepped down, and now we have another CEO. And it remains to be seen if that newest CEO will be able to provide that leadership to risk management in the organization.
Yeah, and there's a key note that you mentioned there is that these disasters are almost entirely, if not entirely, preventable.
Absolutely.
Right? A case study that I studied during the course was the Sewol Ferry crisis. I don't know if you looked at it personally, but it was a South Korean ferry that had capsized. And that one strikes me the most. There was hundreds of people that died on that ship, but it was the hundreds of students, the high school students.
Right.
Just knowing that all that potential, they're young, they're students, right? That one really strikes me the most, and that's kind of what led to me wanting to talk with you, because we say the word safety, but there's one way to say safety, one thing to say safety, and then another thing to actually think about what actually happens when these measures are not taken. And
right.
then you look deeper into it, and then it's frustrating when you see that they were completely preventable, right?
Absolutely. The organizations, the people in the organizations weren't living safety. They weren't living their values. And, it is terrible, especially when young people lose their lives, when we as engineers aren't in the business of risk management. Like, that's our job. Our job as engineers is to protect the public and be in the business of risk management. Our society depends on us as engineers to ensure that everything we build, all the projects we work on, are safe for the public to use. And our whole reason for being is to help improve people's lives. And so when we don't manage risk properly, we're flying in the face of what our society expects of us as engineers.
Yeah. Now, what firsthand experiences have you had personally that really struck you?
Yeah.
That really caused you to be like, okay, safety is really important.
Absolutely. So yeah, I've had a few experiences in my past. Most of them right when I graduated from engineering and I started working. And the one there's a couple, but one that sticks in my mind in particular, I worked for a nameless pipeline company.
Okay.
So I was brought on as a subcontractor to do some soil and groundwater testing when the company was doing some of its stress corrosion cracking pipeline digs.
Okay.
So they were looking to see if there was a correlation, and this was a long time ago. This would have been like 1998. So they were looking to see if there was a correlation between where the pipeline was experiencing these stress corrosion cracks and if there were like high carbonate levels, high moisture content, so on and so forth. So I was brought in to test the soil to see what the conditions were like. And it really just was like the wild, wild west. I was brought in on a crew and there really wasn't a lot of focus on safety, right? So they would dig up the pipeline. Occasionally there was no tracer wire to appropriately locate the pipeline, and then they'd bring in a backhoe to dig out either side of the pipeline.
Okay.
And occasionally the backhoe would contact the pipeline, and it's a large natural gas pipeline, so they couldn't shut it down, and so they just reduced the pressure, which would, if something went wrong and there was an explosion, at least it would reduce the consequences, but that doesn't say much for those of us that were working on the pipeline at the time. And little ingress and egress provided, occasionally I'd stand on the end of the backhoe and it would lower me down into some of the spots so I could get soil samples and whatnot. So it was very eye-opening,
Right.
both in terms of, how work sometimes gets done, especially when you're in a rush or when the organization's in a rush to get things done. And if you don't know any better, you're like, oh, I know this doesn't seem right, but I'd never had any formal safety and risk management training when I went through my university days. So yeah, like, you see these things happening, and it's only afterwards you're like, yeah, you know what? Well, I probably shouldn't have done that. Like, luckily, nothing went wrong. Everything was fine, and I learned a lot. But I was placing myself at risk when I was doing that work. Yeah. So, reflecting on that, that's why I do this now, is because I want engineering students now to have that knowledge and that ability to be empowered and say no, like recognize those situations if they're being asked to work in them, and say no and stand up for themselves to just refuse the work or work with your employer to do things better, because not all organizations recognize that they need to do better risk management. So, many young engineers can work with their organizations to do things better if the organization's willing to do so. So I'm so happy to have the opportunity to teach young engineering students how to recognize hazards, manage risk, so that they can protect themselves and also help to protect everyone around them as well.
And I'm sure that a lot of students will be listening to this as well. And the big part of what you mentioned was being in a rush, right? Now, something that I wish that I knew earlier, like I'm a co-op student, and something that I wish I knew earlier from your course is just knowing the importance of safety and just not rushing, right? Like, productivity is important in a business, but your safety is way more important than the productivity of the company.
Absolutely, right? Like, there are a couple of key messages from the course, but the one is not rushing. Like every case study that we look at in the course, and many that the teams look at in the course for their own projects, have rushing, right? So they were rushing, and other things were taking precedence over safety, right? And it's not a matter of the fact that you're never going to experience pressures in the work world. You will always have production pressures. You'll have budget pressures, schedule pressures, resource pressures, like who's available. There'll always be those constraints, but it's when safety takes a back seat to those constraints instead of being the first thing and the only thing.
That's when something happens.
That's when something happens. And it's just ensuring that safety is the basis for the decisions that are made, right? So instead of production being the king, right? All the decisions are made on, well, how much production can we get? Well, no, how much production can we get safely, right? If we can't do it safely, then we don't do it. We can find other efficiencies, we can find other improvements, but we have to do everything safely.
If you can't do it safely, then don't do it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's striking. That's definitely something that I wish I knew earlier. And I mean, just even in my young career, I've only done 2 8-month co-ops so far, and it's nice to see that the industry like prioritizes safety, or has safety as a value, I might say instead.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, it's nice to see that it's shifting to where young engineers can get home at the end of the day. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And like, just a shout out to the co-op program. I love the co-op program, because I find that students who are taking, that 4th year engineering course in leadership and risk management, they get a lot more out of it when they've had some experience working, right? In the engineering industry, whatever that might be. And when you come into the course and you've seen either how things are working well in terms of risk management or things are not working so well, depending on where you're placed or whatever, it makes a lot more sense when you've been on a co-op placement and you can really see realistically and truthfully how risk management is done. So the co-op program is fantastic. I wish every engineering student at the U of A had the opportunity to be in a co-op.
100%, I fully agree. So far we're talking a lot about, real life cases and all of that. And I hope that people are realizing exactly like why you are one of the most important positions of professors at university, when you're studying engineering, why this course is so valuable and just so important. Now, with all this importance, with all this responsibility to teach all of these students to be safe, and knowing that what you're teaching could potentially save a life, how do you cope with this? Like, you have 8 years, you've gone through countless case studies. How do you cope with this? Because it's just it's a lot to take in.
Yeah, I don't look at it as coping with it. I really look at it as an opportunity. It's a real opportunity. The better job I do at teaching the students the material, the better they're going to be prepared to deal with risk in real life. And that's why in our course in particular, we go out of our way to use integrated learning, blended learning, so that students have an opportunity to interact with the material, right? It's one thing for me to just stand up at the front of the room and talk, but you lose people that way, right? How can I give our students an opportunity to really learn and engage with the material and learn it? And that's partly where the team project comes from, because by investigating in a team a loss incident that's happened somewhere, it gives you an opportunity to learn about how they failed and learn how to do things better.
Yeah. Now, what is the role of the engineer in a risk management system, and what happens when an engineer, doesn't put safety in the front seat? Like, what happens to their license? Just speak a little bit on that aspect.
Yeah, well, the engineer's role depends on the position that
they're in.
And yeah, right. So, as an engineer in training, you'll be learning and you'll be working under a professional engineering mentor. But that mentor might not have had a course like that you had the opportunity to take. So, perhaps there's an opportunity for that EIT to bring forward the idea of a risk management system, or how the different aspects of the risk management system can be improved within the organization. But yeah, it really depends on what position you have. But the long and the short of it is whatever position you have, you need to figure out what your risk management responsibilities are and adhere to them, right? Because as professional engineers, we have a duty to uphold our APEGA code of ethics, and we have a duty to ensure that the public and the environment are protected. So it really all stems from that. It's part of our jobs to manage risk. So we need to do it in the best way that we can.
Yeah. Now, risk management systems, we give out these systems that are supposedly supposed to standardize the way that we should think about how we go out in our workplaces, right? Mm-hmm. Now, how do we... Well, the problem with standardizing and everything like that is that it is under the assumption that everyone will adhere to those to the system, right? To the rules of the system. So how do we kind of take into account for human error in these systems?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because everybody makes mistakes. Right. People can be fatigued. right? Because, did you have a full 11-hour sleep last night and you're functioning at 100% of your mental capacity? I don't know that I could answer yes to that myself, right? So people get fatigued, they can get distracted, and they make mistakes. There's no human where you don't make any mistakes. None of us are perfect. So the idea is that the risk management system is designed and implemented in a way that minimizes the risk from people making mistakes, right? Okay. Whether that's, not having two valves with different types of chemicals in them located right next to each other, where someone can choose to turn the wrong valve if they're not paying attention or they're tired, or, how can we ensure that even if people make mistakes, that they don't lose their lives because of it? So it means that our risk management system has to be robust enough to protect people from themselves, essentially. And that's not always possible, of course, but, how can we help people fail safely? And so you would just look at the risk management system, and especially looking at design. That's why we talk about prevention through design. It starts at design, right? It's a bit late once you've already got those two valves sitting right next to each other at a facility to make changes, or you can make changes, but it then gets very expensive. Well, why didn't we worry about that and think about that and control for that at the design stage, phase, right? Because that's when it's cheapest and easiest to make some of those changes and protect people, like workers, from, if you make a mistake, that you don't lose your life because of it.
Yeah. Now, let's talk a little bit about the business case now.
Sure.
So what's interesting is that I learned in the course was that, when you're going through doing a safety program, making these risk management systems, throughout my co-ops, you see that you bring out huge meetings, like the whole corporate-wide or company-wide meetings. That just seems like it balloons overhead. You invest in a ton of PPE, a ton of software, used to help in these risk management systems. But how can all of these costs be seen as an investment instead?
Yes, well, sometimes it is a hard thing to do, right? Because organizations have typically seen safety and risk management as sunk costs, right? So that's where you spend money and you don't see any benefit from it. So we definitely make the argument, because it's shown it's been shown in industry time after time, that it really is an investment in the business, right? So when you invest in safety, then you realize other benefits, right? Whether it's maintenance costs that are reduced, or production that's increased, or other benefits that come along with it. Yeah. It's not a matter of saying that there are benefits, it's quantifying them, right? It's difficult to quantify what avoiding a catastrophic loss incident would be of benefit. Like, how much benefit would that be to the organization, other than the obvious disaster of losing people's lives. But when organizations are thinking about implementing a risk management system, that's very clear. Like, you can develop a cost estimate for implementing a training program, and you can estimate a cost for implementing a regular maintenance schedule. But how do you know how much a loss incident is going to cost the organization?
Right.
So it's never a matter of safety at any cost, right, or at all costs, because the organization still needs to make a profit. It still needs to be sustainable to continue business in the future. So where is that sweet spot where you invest in a risk management system and you reduce the risk from the organization's activities to a level that's reasonable, right? That's acceptable to the organization. You're not going to spend millions and millions and millions of dollars if you don't see some sort of benefit, right? So it's about making that business case, running some of those numbers, running the calculations, and then at the end of the day, it's also not just about the business case. It's about presenting an argument to the leadership in the whatever organization to say, you know, we want everyone to be safe. We want everyone to go home at the end of the day. Do you have a son or a daughter that works in this company? Well, we want to make sure that they're not killed on the job. So it goes beyond just presenting the numbers and facts and figures to making an emotional argument, right? Like playing on people, capitalizing on people's pride in their work and the organization, as well as their love for the people that work in the organization as well. So it's kind of a two-pronged approach, I would say. First, making sure that you have a cost estimate for that risk management system, but then also saying, making the emotional case case for risk management system as well.
Yeah, and just to simplify all that valuable information that you gave, I like to think of it almost as, let's say you spent $1 million in costs to implement the system, right? Now, let's say that system had actually prevented a $100 million catastrophe that would have cost $100 million, maybe in assets, or caused the end of the company, essentially. The end of operation of the company.
For sure.
So these systems, they really can't be seen as costs because they're really true investments. And it's weird to think about because you think about an ROI, right? You think of an investment, and then you think about of the revenue and your margins that you're going to get back from it. But here you don't really see it because it's something that you prevented.
Exactly, it's something that if you're doing it right, you'll never see happen.
You'll never see the cost.
So it's tough, right? Yeah. It's tough to make that business case, right? Sometimes.
Yeah. Now I want to talk about some of the tech innovations. Do you know any tech innovations that are happening in the industry that really have supported risk management systems in the modern day?
For sure. So there are things. The first thing that popped into my head were autonomous vehicle operation, right? So where you don't have a person sitting in the cab of some of these very, very large vehicles because, people can be fatigued, they can make mistakes, they can run off the road, they can be involved in accidents. If they're autonomous vehicles that are being, either driven remotely or truly autonomous vehicles in the sense of the word, you just tell them where to go and off they go. That's coming, right? Or actually, it exists in some instances. So there are things like that. But then there's also research work that's going on in terms of using machine learning to help prevent incidents and prevent human error. So what they're doing is they're using machine learning to look at past incident reports and learning what are the most common ways that people hurt themselves and finding ways that it can be used as a predictor. And then obviously you'd invest in preventing those types of incidents from happening. Yeah. And I'm not doing a great job of explaining it either. You'd have to speak to some of my colleagues who do research in that arena to get more information. But there is a lot of research that's happening currently around safety and risk management as well.
You mentioned the vehicle one, and I think you mentioned about not being a fan of the reverse park, right?
Oh, yes, a back-in policy. That's going to get me in trouble. Yes, I'm not a fan of back-in policies because it means that when you back in, you're still going backwards. You still have to pay attention even if you're backing a vehicle into a stall.
Yeah.
Right? So, yeah.
Okay, sweet. Now, I want to talk more about the leadership aspect of a risk management system.
Sure.
So, what is the role of the leader in one of these systems, in one of these programs, and because there will be a lot of these students that will go into these leadership roles as engineers. So how do you think as a leader in order to, help save a life?
Yeah, the goal of a leader should be to have a value of safety in the culture of the organization, and everything else they do is in support of that, right? So whether it's communicating that within the organization, like providing that tone at the top, also providing the structure and the frameworks for the implementation of a risk management system, also empowering people to speak up and speak out if they see something that's wrong.
Speaking up, yeah.
Yeah, and just providing an organization that empowers employees to do their jobs to the best of their ability. And that's everyone. That's not just the engineers, but that's all the people within the organization, right?
Mm-hmm. Now, as we come to my final question, I want to share this little quote that I came up as I was coming up with this podcast. And it's, at the end of the day, everyone wants everyone to go home at the end of the day.
Nice,
yeah.
Yes.
So I just want to say that again. At the end of the day, everyone wants everyone else to go home at the end of the day. Okay. So how does the worker mindset have to shift in order to make sure that everyone goes home at the end of the day?
Yeah, it's interesting that you focus on the worker, because the worker is simply a reflection of the leadership within the organization.
Right.
Right. A worker is only going to work to the standards set by the leaders in the organization. So if leadership's taking shortcuts, workers will take shortcuts. If leadership is only paying lip service to safety, then workers will only pay lip service to safety. The work that's being done is a reflection of how well the company is being run by the folks that are in power, whether that's the CEO or the senior VPs. They're a mirror, right? And everyone works to the standards that are set for them by leadership.
Okay.
So sorry. What did you say? Something about the workers? What did you?
Yeah.
What were you actually asking?
Yeah. What do you think? How do you think the mindset really needs to change for, like, maybe for a worker or even for just leadership? But it seemed like what you were applying there is that in order for the worker mindset to change, that the leadership's mindset needs to actually change. So it actually seems like you're implying that the worker really needs to speak up. It really just comes down to the worker speaking up and actually being a leader themselves.
Absolutely. So everyone is a leader in safety, but people can only speak up when they trust the organization, when they trust their leadership to not, issue reprisals or, berate the worker. It needs to be a trusting environment. So people can speak truth to power, but only in a trusting situation, right?
Yeah, it's much easier said than done to speak up. Hey,
absolutely. So that's the whole thing about risk management. It's a lot easier said than done, right? We teach all of our fourth years. We teach them about safety being a value. We teach them about risk management systems. We teach them about leadership. And, we teach all of these things, many tools. They're only as good as how well they're used. All of them, right? So, I think about like plan, do, check, act. That's a key responsibility of leadership and management to implement that in an organization. It's like 4 steps. It's like super, super simple, but it's far, far more difficult to actually implement it in an organization, because again, it's about having the leadership will and drive to do it. And then you don't just do it once. It has to be ongoing, and you have to have this relentless, pursuit for doing things better and relentless drive to ensure that we're managing those risks. And it's a really, really hard thing to do. It requires a lot of effort and a lot of drive and a lot of commitment. But the flip side of that is if we don't have leadership, whether that's, the CEO or, the engineers, like professionals in the organization, all the way down to the workers. Sorry, I shouldn't say all the way down to the workers, all the way through to the frontline workers, that everyone has to participate in the risk management process.
Right. Is there any additional comments, some last comments that you want to leave with the students or those that are viewing the podcast, listening in on Spotify or just watching on YouTube?
Yeah, I just hope that the course is useful for engineering students that are going out into the working world, because I think without it, it really leaves you a kind of in no man's land in terms of risk management, because it's not in any other courses. Yeah. So now, while that's changing, we're going to start implementing. There's a commitment on the behalf of the Faculty of Engineering to start implementing risk management into other courses. Like last year, we started in the first year design course. We implemented safety and risk management into the first year design course. And so we're continuing, but it's so important to have that information and that knowledge before you go out into the working world. So
awesome.
That's what I hope students take with them.
Sweet. Thank you so much, Professor.
You're welcome.